6 o'clock in the morning. Your alarm goes off. You reach over, silence it, and think to yourself, today is going to be different. Today, everything changes. But it doesn't. Fast forward to 11 o'clock at night. You're lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, and you realize something devastating. You're still the same person. Same habits, same patterns, same disappointing results. And here's what truly terrifies you when you're honest with yourself. This isn't just today. This loop has been running for years, maybe even a decade. Every morning, the same promise. Every night, the same failure. So why does this keep happening? Why can't you break free? Here's the brutal truth most people never realize. You've been fighting the wrong battle. You think you need to change your behaviors, your routines, your actions. But those are just symptoms. The real enemy lives deeper. It's the invisible mental habits hardwired into your brain. Thought patterns so automatic, you don't even know they're there. And right now, as you listen to this, several of them are running in the background of your mind, quietly sabotaging everything you're trying to build. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how to find these hidden mental habits and destroy them one by one. But I need to warn you, what you're about to discover won't be comfortable. You're going to see things about yourself you've spent years avoiding, patterns you've never noticed, beliefs you thought were facts, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. Your entire understanding of why you've been stuck will shift completely. So, if you're ready to stop lying to yourself and finally break free from the mental prison you've been living in, then stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll never think the same way again. Let me introduce you to James Whitmore. It's March 2019. James is 42 years old. He lives in a one-bedroom flat in Waterloo, South London. Every morning, he wakes at 6:15, makes instant coffee because he's always running late, and rushes to catch the 7:03 train from Waterloo Station to Canary Wharf, where he works as a marketing manager for a mid-sized financial services firm. James has been with the company for 18 years. 18 years of showing up, doing good work, being reliable. He's not brilliant, but he's not incompetent either. He's what his colleagues call solid, the kind of person you can depend on to get the job done, even if he's never the one with the innovative ideas or the bold proposals. On this particular morning in March, James is sitting on the Jubilee line, squeezed between a teenager scrolling through TikTok and a middle-aged woman reading the Financial Times. He's thinking about a presentation he has to give later that day. He's been working on it for 3 weeks. It's meant to propose a new digital marketing strategy to senior management. It's a good proposal. Actually, it's an excellent proposal. But James has rewritten it 17 times. 17 times. Because every time he reviews it, he finds something that could be better. A slide that could be more polished. A statistic that needs double-checking. A phrase that doesn't quite capture what he means. And so he keeps tweaking, adjusting, perfecting. Until now, the morning of the presentation, he's exhausted before he's even begun. When James arrives at the office, he grabs another coffee from the machine, the kind that tastes vaguely of cardboard and regret, and heads to his desk. He has 2 hours before the meeting, 2 hours to run through the presentation one more time. Maybe 18 times is the charm, but then his phone buzzes. It's an email from David Harrison, his boss. The subject line reads, "Quick chat before the meeting?" James feels his stomach drop. Quick chats with David are never quick, and they're rarely just chats. They're usually warnings, course, corrections, polite British ways of saying you've disappointed someone. He walks to David's office, knocks twice on the already open door, and David looks up from his laptop with that expression every middle manager in Britain learns to wear. Friendly, but not too friendly. Concerned, but not alarming. "James, come in. Close the door, will you?" James closes the door, sits down, waits. David leans back in his chair, hands clasped behind his head, in that position that's meant to look casual but actually radiates authority. "So, about this presentation, I've had a look at your latest draft. It's good work, James. Really solid. There's that word again. Solid. But here's the thing," David continues. "Sophie Chen is going to be in the meeting today." James feels something tighten in his chest. Sophie Chen. Of course she is. Sophie Chen is a name everyone in the company knows, even though she left 3 years ago to start her own digital marketing agency. She and James started at the firm on the same day, almost 2 decades ago. They were both 24, fresh out of university, full of ideas and energy. They were friends, actually. Good friends. They used to get pints after work at the pub near Liverpool Street, talking about their ambitions, their plans, the businesses they'd start someday. But somewhere along the way, their paths diverged. Sophie left to launch her startup. It failed within 18 months. She lost everything. James remembers hearing about it, feeling a guilty sense of relief that he'd played it safe, stayed in his stable job with his steady paycheck. But Sophie didn't give up. She learned from her failure, started again, and built a company that's now worth £7 million. She's a sought-after speaker, an industry thought leader, someone who gets quoted in Forbes and The Guardian. And James? James is still at the same desk, in the same building, working for the same man he worked for a decade ago. Sophie's consulting with us on digital transformation, David says. She'll be in the meeting to provide an external perspective. I'm sure you'll both enjoy catching up. James nods, says something about looking forward to it, walks back to his desk, sits down, stares at his presentation on the screen, and then, slowly, inevitably, the voice in his head starts talking, the voice that's been his constant companion for as long as he can remember. It says, "You're going to look like an idiot compared to her." It says, "Your ideas are pedestrian. Everyone's going to see it." It says, "You've wasted 18 years. You're 42 years old and you've achieved nothing." It says, "Sophie was always smarter than you, more ambitious, more talented. You were never in the same league." James knows this voice isn't helpful. He knows it's irrational. But knowing something and being able to stop it are two very different things. The voice doesn't need his permission. It just runs. Automatic. Relentless. He opens his presentation again, looks at slide 7. The statistics suddenly seem weak. The phrasing feels clumsy. Maybe he should rewrite this section. Maybe he should add more research. Maybe he should. His phone buzzes again. Another email. This one from his mother, asking if he's coming for Sunday roast this weekend. She's been asking every week for the past year. James keeps saying he's too busy. The truth is, he just can't face the inevitable questions. When are you going to get promoted? Why hasn't it happened yet? Your cousin Marcus just made partner at his law firm. Have you thought about changing careers? James closes the email without responding. Looks at his presentation. Looks at the time. 1 hour and 47 minutes until the meeting. He takes a deep breath, opens slide 7, starts rewriting. This is James Whitmore's life, and if we're being completely honest, there's a good chance it's yours too. Maybe you're not 42. Maybe you don't live in London. Maybe you don't work in marketing. But the patterns, the mental habits that keep James trapped in a life that's smaller than his potential, those are universal, and they're destroying you just as surely as they're destroying him. Let me explain what's actually happening inside James's mind, because once you understand this, you'll start seeing it everywhere. In yourself, in everyone around you, and you'll realize just how much of your life has been controlled by invisible forces you never even knew existed. James is trapped by 7 mental habits, 7 thought patterns that feel natural, that feel like just the way he is, but are actually learned behaviors. Neural pathways carved deep into his brain through years of repetition. And the truly insidious part, these habits disguise themselves as logic, as caution, as realism. They convince you they're protecting you when really, they're suffocating you. The first habit is overthinking. James has been working on this presentation for 3 weeks, rewriting it 17 times, because his brain has learned to treat every decision as a potential catastrophe. Overthinking isn't about being thorough. It's not about having high standards. It's about being so terrified of making the wrong choice that you become paralyzed by analysis. You gather more information, run more scenarios, consider more possibilities, until the sheer volume of options crushes your ability to actually decide anything. Research from Stanford University's neuroscience department shows that chronic overthinkers have hyperactive default mode networks in their brains. This is the neural circuit responsible for self-referential thinking, the endless internal monologue about what could go wrong, what others might think, what you should have done differently. For most people, this network quiets down when they focus on a specific task. But for overthinkers like James, it never shuts off. It runs constantly, draining mental energy, creating anxiety, and preventing decisive action. The second habit is perfectionism. And before you say, "But isn't perfectionism a good thing? Doesn't it mean you have high standards?" Let me be very clear. Perfectionism has nothing to do with excellence. Perfectionism is a defense mechanism. It's a way of protecting yourself from criticism by never allowing your work to be truly finished, truly vulnerable to judgment. If you can always find one more thing to improve, one more detail to polish, then you never have to face the terrifying moment when you put your work into the world and let others evaluate it. James rewrites his presentation 17 times, not because version 17 is meaningfully better than version 3. He rewrites it because as long as he's still working on it, it can't fail. The moment he stops tinkering and actually presents it, that's when people can judge it. And him. And perfectionism whispers that if there's even the slightest flaw, even the smallest imperfection, then the whole thing is worthless. And so is he. The third habit is fear of failure. This one's obvious, isn't it? Everyone's afraid of failing. But here's what most people don't understand. The fear of failure isn't about the actual consequences of failing. It's about what failure means about your identity. When James imagines his presentation going badly, he's not worried about the practical outcome. He's not thinking, well, if this doesn't go well, I might not get that budget increase. He's thinking, if this fails, it proves I'm not good enough. It confirms what I've always secretly suspected about myself. Fear of failure transforms every challenge into an identity test. Instead of seeing a presentation as a presentation, an opportunity to share ideas, James sees it as evidence that will either prove his worth or expose his inadequacy. And when the stakes feel that high, every single time, of course you're going to be paralyzed by anxiety. The fourth habit is the comparison trap. James's entire sense of self-worth has become dependent on how he measures up against Sophie Chen. Not against his own goals, not against his own values, against someone else's achievements. The comparison trap is particularly destructive because it's a game you can never win. There will always be someone more successful, more talented, more accomplished. Always. So if your sense of value comes from being better than others, you're condemning yourself to a lifetime of inadequacy. But here's the really devastating part. The comparison trap also robs you of the ability to celebrate anyone else's success. When James hears about Sophie's achievements, he doesn't feel inspired. He doesn't feel happy for her. He feels diminished, as if her success somehow takes something away from him, as if there's a finite amount of worth in the world, and her having more means he must have less. This habit turns potential friendships into competitions, potential mentors into threats, and the success of others into evidence of your own failure. The fifth habit is negative self-talk. That voice in James's head, the one that tells him he's going to look like an idiot, that his ideas are pedestrian, that he's wasted 18 years. That voice runs constantly, providing a running commentary on everything he does, and it's almost entirely negative. You might think this voice is just being honest, just telling you the truth about your limitations. But let me ask you something. If you had a friend who spoke to you the way you speak to yourself in your own mind, how long would you remain friends with that person? Negative self-talk isn't realism. It's not honesty. It's a learned habit, usually developed in childhood, that interprets every situation through a lens of self-criticism. And here's the neurological reality. Your brain doesn't distinguish between external criticism and internal criticism. When you tell yourself you're not good enough, your brain processes that as a threat to your social standing, your belonging, your survival. It activates the same stress responses, releases the same hormones, creates the same anxiety as if someone else were attacking you. Except it's worse. Because you can walk away from external critics. You can't walk away from your own mind. The sixth habit is procrastination. And before you say, oh, I know about procrastination, I'm just lazy, stop right there. Procrastination has nothing to do with laziness. Research from the British Psychological Society has shown that chronic procrastination is actually a form of emotional regulation. You're not avoiding the task. You're avoiding the negative emotions associated with the task. The anxiety, the self-doubt, the fear of failure. Procrastination is your brain's way of saying, this feels uncomfortable, so let's do something else that feels better right now. James has been telling himself for 5 years that he's going to apply for a senior management position. 5 years. He has the qualifications. He has the experience. But every time an opportunity comes up, he finds a reason to delay. This isn't the right time. He needs a bit more experience. He should wait until after this major project is finished. He'll apply next quarter, next year. When things are less busy, these aren't real reasons. They're excuses his brain generates to avoid the discomfort of putting himself out there, being evaluated, potentially being rejected. And so 5 years pass, and he's still in the same position, with the same salary, doing the same work, wondering why his career never progresses. The seventh habit is the fixed mindset. This is the belief that your abilities, your intelligence, your potential are all fixed traits. You're either smart or you're not, talented or you're not, destined for success or you're not. And there's nothing you can do to change that fundamental reality. Carol Dweck's groundbreaking research at Stanford University showed that people with fixed mindsets interpret every challenge as a test of their inherent worth. If they struggle with something, it means they lack the natural ability. If they fail, it proves they weren't meant to succeed in that area. James looks at Sophie Chen and thinks, she was always more talented than me, more driven, more naturally gifted at this work. It never occurs to him that Sophie failed spectacularly with her first business, that she spent months learning from that failure, developing new skills, changing her approach. To James, Sophie's success seems inevitable, proof of her inherent superiority, and his lack of equal success seems equally inevitable, proof of his inherent limitations. The fixed mindset is perhaps the most destructive habit of all, because it makes change feel impossible. Why try to improve if your abilities are predetermined? Why take risks if failure reveals your fundamental inadequacy? Why pursue ambitious goals if you're simply not the kind of person who achieves them? These 7 habits don't operate in isolation. They reinforce each other, creating a web of thought patterns that traps you in place. James overthinks the presentation because he's a perfectionist. He's a perfectionist because he's afraid of failure. He's afraid of failure because he's constantly comparing himself to others. He compares himself to others because his self-talk has convinced him he's inadequate. His negative self-talk fuels procrastination. His procrastination reinforces his fixed mindset. And his fixed mindset makes him overthink even more, because if he can't grow and change, then every decision becomes permanently consequential. Round and round it goes, a self-perpetuating cycle of thoughts that feel like reality but are actually just habits. Learned patterns of thinking that can, with the right approach, be unlearned. Now, let's return to James on that March morning in 2019. He's sitting at his desk, 45 minutes until the meeting, still rewriting slide 7 for the 3rd time that morning. His coffee has gone cold. His shoulders are tense. His jaw is clenched. He's trapped in his mind, running scenarios, imagining Sophie's judgment, hearing that critical voice growing louder and louder. And then, something happens. Something small. Something that will change everything. His phone rings. Not an email notification. Un actual phone call. James looks at the screen. It's a number he doesn't recognize. Normally, he'd let it go to voicemail, but he's looking for any excuse to avoid his presentation for another few minutes, so he answers. James Whitmore speaking. James? Oh my God, I wasn't sure you'd still have the same number. It's Sophie Chen. James's stomach drops for the 2nd time that morning. Sophie? Hi, I heard you were coming in today for the meeting. Yeah, I'm actually in the lobby right now. Listen, I know this is last minute, but I got here early and I'm absolutely desperate for a proper coffee. Not that terrible machine stuff they have upstairs. There's a cafe around the corner. You know, the one on West Ferry Circus? Would you have time to grab a quick drink before the meeting? I'd love to catch up properly. Every instinct in James's body screams at him to say no. He needs these 45 minutes. He needs to keep working on the presentation. He can't waste time on small talk. And besides, the idea of sitting across from Sophie Chen, with her £7 million company and her Guardian quotes, while he's still at the same job doing the same work, feels like volunteering for humiliation. But there's something in her voice, a warmth, a genuine friendliness that reminds him of 20 years ago, when they were just 2 kids who'd landed their first proper jobs and were excited about the future. And something in him, some part that hasn't been entirely crushed by 2 decades of playing it safe, says yes. Sure, he hears himself say, I'll be down in 2 minutes. He saves the presentation without looking at it again, grabs his jacket, takes the lift down to the lobby, and there she is, Sophie Chen. Except she doesn't look like the polished tech entrepreneur from the Forbes profile photos. She's wearing jeans and trainers and a casual blazer, and her hair's pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looks, James thinks with surprise, completely normal, human even. She smiles when she sees him, a genuine smile that reaches her eyes. "James, you look exactly the same." They walk to the cafe, making small talk about the weather, the neighborhood, how much Canary Wharf has changed. They order coffee, proper coffee from an actual barista, and sit at a small table by the window. And then Sophie says something that cracks open a door James didn't even know was closed. "Can I be honest with you?" she says, stirring her flat white. "I'm absolutely terrified about this meeting." James stares at her. "You're terrified? You're the external expert. You're the one with a £1 million company." Sophie laughs, but it's not a confident laugh. It's nervous. 7 million, actually. But you know what? I spent 3 hours last night lying awake, convinced I'm going to walk into that room and everyone will realize I'm a fraud. That I just got lucky. That I don't actually know what I'm doing. James feels something shift inside his chest. "You're serious? Completely serious. James, can I tell you something? When my first business failed, I didn't sleep properly for 6 months. I was convinced I'd proven that I wasn't cut out for entrepreneurship, that I should just get a normal job again and stop kidding myself. Every single day I woke up thinking, see, you tried, and you failed. That's what you are, a failure. But you started again, James says. You built something successful. I did. But not because I suddenly became confident or fearless or any of that nonsense you read in business magazines. I started again because I got therapy, proper cognitive behavioral therapy. And my therapist, this brilliant woman named Emma Richardson up in Yorkshire, she taught me something that changed everything." Sophie leans forward, and her voice drops slightly, becoming more intense. "She taught me that the voice in my head, the one telling me I was going to fail, that I wasn't good enough, that I should just give up. That voice wasn't telling me the truth. It was just a habit, a mental pattern I'd learned, probably in childhood, that had been running on autopilot my entire life. And just like any habit, it could be changed." James feels his throat tighten. How? By recognizing it, by seeing it for what it actually is. Not reality, not wisdom, not your inner truth. Just a habit, a thought pattern. Something your brain does automatically because it's done it so many times before that it feels natural. But James, just because something feels natural doesn't mean it's helpful. Just because you've always thought a certain way doesn't mean you have to keep thinking that way. She looks at her watch. "We should probably head back. But listen, after the meeting, if you want to talk more about this, I'd love to. Emma changed my life, genuinely. And I think maybe you could benefit from some of what I learned." They walk back to the office together, take the lift up to the 14th floor, head to the conference room where David and 3 other senior managers are already waiting. The presentation goes fine, not perfect. James stumbles over a few words. One of his slides has a formatting issue he didn't catch. But it's fine. His ideas are solid, even if he is. The senior team approves the budget. Sophie adds some thoughtful commentary and suggestions. Professional, collaborative. And when it's over, when James is packing up his laptop, Sophie walks over and hands him a business card. But it's not her company card. It's something else. A small white card with a name and a phone number. "That's Emma Richardson," Sophie says quietly. "My therapist. She works remotely now, does video sessions. I already asked her if I could share her details with you. No pressure at all. But if you're interested, she's brilliant. And James? Everyone thinks they're the only one who feels like this. But you're not. You're really, really not." James takes the card, puts it in his wallet, goes back to his desk, opens his email, stares at his mother's message about Sunday roast, and for the first time in as long as he can remember, something feels different. The voice is still there, the one that says he's not good enough, that he's wasted his potential, that it's too late to change. It's still running its usual script, but now, just slightly, James can hear it differently. Not as truth, not as his authentic inner voice, but as Sophie said, as a habit, a pattern, something that's been running on autopilot for so long that he forgot it was even there. And if it's a habit, then maybe, just maybe, it can be changed. 3 days pass before James calls the number on the card. 3 days of sitting at his desk, staring at Emma Richardson's contact details, creating elaborate reasons why he doesn't need therapy. He's not depressed. He's functional. He goes to work every day, pays his bills, maintains his flat. Therapy is for people with real problems, isn't it? People who can't cope, and he's coping just fine, except he's not, and he knows it. On Thursday evening, After another day of rewriting emails before sending them, of second-guessing every decision, of watching the clock tick past 6:30 while his colleagues leave for the pub and he stays behind to finish a few things, James picks up his phone. His thumb hovers over the keypad. The voice in his head starts its familiar routine. This is ridiculous. You're 42 years old. You don't need help. You just need to work harder. Be more disciplined. Stop being so weak. But then he remembers Sophie's face in that cafe. The way she'd admitted her own terror. The way she'd said, "You're not the only one who feels like this." And before the voice can build up more momentum, before his brain can generate another excuse, James dials the number. Emma Richardson answers on the third ring. Her voice is warm, professional, with a subtle Yorkshire accent that immediately puts James at ease. They talk for 15 minutes. She explains how she works, what cognitive behavioral therapy involves, what he might expect from their sessions. She doesn't make grand promises. She doesn't claim she'll fix him or transform his life. She simply says, "We'll look at the patterns in your thinking, see which ones are serving you and which ones aren't, and then we'll explore whether there might be more helpful ways to think about things." They schedule their first video session for the following Tuesday evening. When Tuesday arrives, James finishes work at 6, microwaves a ready meal he doesn't really taste, and at 7 o'clock sharp, logs into the video call. Emma's office appears on his laptop screen, bookshelves behind her, filled with thick psychology texts and, incongruously, a small collection of ceramic owls. She's in her mid-50s, with grey-streaked hair pulled back from her face and glasses perched on her nose. She looks exactly like what she is. Someone who's spent decades listening to people's problems and actually trying to help them solve those problems. "James," she says, smiling, "thank you for being on time. You'd be surprised how many people are late to their first session. Or don't show up at all. The fact that you're here, that you've taken this step, that's already meaningful." They spend the first session going through James's history. His childhood in Manchester, growing up in a working-class family where university wasn't expected but was celebrated when he achieved it. His parents' quiet pride when he got the job in London. His relationship with Sophie in those early years, the friendship that had felt easy and equal, the gradual divergence of their paths, his 18 years at the same company, the promotions that never quite came, the ambitions that slowly faded into acceptance. Emma listens without judgment, taking occasional notes, asking clarifying questions that seem simple but somehow cut right to the heart of things. And then, about 40 minutes into the session, she says something that stops James cold. "I notice you've used a particular word at least a dozen times since we started talking. The word should. You should have been promoted by now. You should be more successful. You should have made different choices. Can you hear yourself doing that?" James thinks about it. "I suppose so. But those are just facts, aren't they? Things I should have done. Are they? Let's examine that. Who decided you should have been promoted by now? Who created that timeline? Who wrote these rules you're measuring yourself against?" James opens his mouth to answer and realizes he doesn't actually have one. I don't know. Society? Normal career progression?" Emma leans forward slightly. "James, this is going to be one of the most important things we work on together. The vast majority of your suffering, your anxiety, your sense of inadequacy, it all comes from these invisible rules you've internalized. Rules about what you should be, what you should have achieved, how you should be living your life. And the truly fascinating thing? Most of these rules aren't even yours. They're absorbed from parents, from culture, from comparison with others. But you've been living as if they're objective reality, as if there's some universal standard you're failing to meet." She pauses, letting that sink in. What if there isn't? What if the only standard that actually matters is the one you consciously choose for yourself? The session ends shortly after. Emma gives James a homework assignment. Every time he notices himself using the word should, she wants him to stop and ask 3 questions. Who says I should? Why do I believe that? Is this rule actually serving me? James thinks it sounds simple, almost too simple. But over the next week, as he starts paying attention, he's shocked by how often the word appears in his internal monologue. He should be further along in his career. He should be married by now. He should own property instead of renting. He should go to his mother's for Sunday roast. He should be more confident. Should work harder. Should be different than he is. Hundreds of shoulds. Thousands, probably, if he counted them all. Each one a tiny judgment, a small declaration of inadequacy. And beneath them all, the unspoken belief that who he is right now isn't acceptable, isn't enough. Their second session, the following Tuesday, focuses on what Emma calls the overthinking trap. She asks James to describe his process for the presentation he'd prepared. When he explains the 17 drafts, the constant revisions, the 3 weeks of preparation, she doesn't look surprised. Tell me what you're afraid would happen if you only did, say, 5 drafts instead of 17. It wouldn't be as good, James says immediately. There might be mistakes, things I'd missed. And if there were mistakes? If you'd missed something? What then? People would judge me. They'd think I wasn't thorough, wasn't professional, and what would that mean about you? James hesitates. The question feels loaded somehow. It would mean I'm not good at my job. Would it? One imperfect presentation means you're not good at your job. You've been there 18 years. Surely, if you weren't good at your job, they'd have let you go by now, I suppose. James, here's what I want you to understand about overthinking. It feels like you're being careful, being responsible, but actually, overthinking is a form of avoidance. Every hour you spend perfecting that presentation is an hour you don't have to face the possibility of it not being perfect. As long as you're still working on it, still revising it, you never have to experience the anxiety of letting it go and accepting whatever response you get. She pulls out a sheet of paper and draws a simple diagram. 2 circles, one labeled Things I Can Control and one labeled Things I Can't Control. The quality of your preparation? That's in the first circle. You can control that. How other people respond to your work? That's in the second circle. Completely outside your control. Overthinking is what happens when you try to control things in the second circle by endlessly perfecting things in the first circle. It doesn't work. It can't work. Because no amount of preparation can control how others will respond. James stares at the diagram. It's so simple it feels almost insulting. But something about it resonates. He thinks about all the times he stayed late at work, rewriting documents, double-checking figures, preparing for every possible question. He'd always told himself this was conscientiousness, diligence. But was it? Or was it just fear dressed up as professionalism? What if I just accept that some things won't be perfect? He asks slowly. Won't that make me mediocre? Emma smiles. Here's a radical idea. What if perfect doesn't exist? What if the pursuit of perfection is actually keeping you from excellence? Because excellence means doing your best work within reasonable constraints, and then moving forward. Perfection means never being satisfied, never being done, never allowing yourself to progress because there's always one more thing that could be improved. She gives him another homework assignment. This week, he's to deliberately do some things imperfectly. Send an email without reading it 5 times. Submit a report with 1 typo left uncorrected. Leave work at 6 o'clock even if there are still tasks on his to-do list. She wants him to practice what she calls strategic imperfection. Not doing bad work, but consciously choosing good enough instead of impossible perfection. The first few times James tries this, his anxiety spikes so high he feels physically ill. He sends an email to a colleague with a minor grammatical error he'd spotted but deliberately left in, and spends the next hour convinced this single mistake will destroy his professional reputation. It doesn't, of course. The colleague responds with the information James requested, not even mentioning the error. Probably didn't even notice it. But for James, it's revolutionary. The world doesn't end when he's imperfect. People don't judge him as harshly as he judges himself, and the time he saves by not obsessively perfecting everything? It's staggering. Hours and hours suddenly available for, well, he's not quite sure what yet, but something. Something other than endless revision and second-guessing. Their third session moves into deeper, more uncomfortable territory. Emma wants to talk about failure, specifically, James's absolute terror of it. Tell me about a time you failed at something, she says. James thinks for a moment. I suppose there was a project about 5 years ago. I proposed a new client relationship management system, spent months researching it, building the business case. But when I presented it to the senior team, they rejected it, said it was too expensive, too risky. That hurt quite a bit. That hurt? Can you be more specific about what you felt? Embarrassed. Stupid. Like I'd wasted everyone's time. Like I'd proven I didn't understand the business as well as I thought I did. And what did you do after that? James shifts in his chair. I I didn't propose any new initiatives for quite a while. Maybe 2 years. I just focused on doing my core work, keeping my head down. Emma nods slowly. So one rejected proposal led to 2 years of not trying anything new. James, do you see what happened there? You interpreted that rejection not as feedback about that specific proposal, but as evidence about your fundamental inadequacy. And then you punished yourself by withdrawing from any situation where you might fail again. She opens a book on her desk, flips to a marked page. I want to read you something from Carol Dweck's research on growth versus fixed mindsets. She talks about 2 ways people interpret failure. People with fixed mindsets see failure as proof of their limitations. If they fail, it means they lack the inherent ability to succeed in that area. So they avoid situations where they might fail, because every failure feels like it's revealing their true, inadequate self. She looks up at James. Does that sound familiar? It does. God, it does. James feels something tight in his chest, like a fist, slowly unclenching. People with growth mindsets, Emma continues, see failure completely differently. To them, failure is just feedback, information about what didn't work. It doesn't say anything about their inherent worth or potential. It's just data that helps them adjust their approach and try again. And here's the fascinating part. These aren't personality traits you're born with. They're mindsets, ways of thinking, which means they can be changed. She closes the book. James, I want you to consider the possibility that you're not afraid of failure itself. You're afraid of what you believe failure means about who you are. And that belief, that story you're telling yourself, is optional. It's not truth. It's just one way of interpreting events. And there are other ways. For homework, Emma assigns what she calls the failure inventory. James is to write down 10 times he's failed at something, not catastrophic, life-destroying failures, just normal failures, times things didn't work out. And for each one, he's to write 2 things. First, what he believed it meant about him at the time. Second, what it might mean if he interpreted it through a growth mindset instead. James spends an evening on this assignment, and it's more difficult than he expected. Not because he can't think of failures, he can think of dozens, but reframing them, seeing them as anything other than proof of his inadequacy, feels like lying to himself, like making excuses. Failure number 3 on his list. The time he applied for a senior position at another firm 7 years ago and didn't even get an interview. At the time, he'd believed it meant he wasn't senior management material, that he'd reached his ceiling. Through a growth mindset, Emma would want him to see it as, what? Feedback that his CV needed work, that he needed more experience in certain areas, that maybe that particular firm wasn't the right fit. It feels weak, like he's being soft on himself. But then James remembers something Emma said in their first session. The way you talk to yourself, would you talk to a friend that way? If your best mate came to you after being rejected for a job, would you tell him he was inadequate and had reached his ceiling? Or would you help him figure out what to improve for next time? James knows the answer. He'd be kind to a friend, supportive, encouraging. But to himself, he's been an absolutely brutal critic for decades. And he'd always thought that's what kept him working hard, striving to improve. But what if it doesn't? What if that voice actually keeps him small, afraid to try, terrified of any situation where he might fail and prove that voice right? By their 4th session, patterns are starting to emerge. Emma points out how many of James's thoughts revolve around comparison. Specifically, comparison to Sophie Chen. Tell me about Sophie, Emma says. Not her achievements. Tell me about who she is as a person. James thinks about this. She's driven, ambitious, always has been. Even back when we started together, she was thinking about building something, creating something, making an impact. I was just happy to have a job. And how did that make you feel back then, when you were just happy to have a job? Fine, I suppose, content. But now? James hesitates. Now it feels like I wasn't ambitious enough, like I settled, like I wasted my potential while she fulfilled hers. James, do you know what she's sacrificed for that success? What her life actually looks like day to day? What her stress levels are? Whether she's happy? Not really. So you're comparing your behind the scenes to her highlight reel. You know every doubt you have, every failure, every moment of inadequacy. But you only see her successes, her wins, the version of herself she presents to the world. That's not a fair comparison. It's not even a real comparison. It's a fantasy you're torturing yourself with. Emma pulls out another sheet, starts drawing. This time it's a graph. This is you, she says, pointing to one line. This is Sophie, pointing to another. In your mind, these lines are racing each other toward the same finish line called success. And Sophie's ahead, which means you're losing. But what if there are no race lines? What if you're on completely different paths, heading toward completely different destinations? What if her success doesn't mean anything about your value? She sets down the pen. The comparison trap is particularly insidious because it's infinite. There will always be someone more successful, more wealthy, more accomplished. Always. So if you're deriving your sense of worth from being better than others, you're guaranteeing your own inadequacy. Because in a world of 8 billion people, there's always someone ahead of you. James feels something crack open inside him. So what do I compare myself to? Yourself. Your own progress. Your own growth. You compare who you are today to who you were a year ago. Are you learning, growing, moving toward the things that actually matter to you? Not the things society says should matter. Not the things Sophie values. The things you genuinely care about. And what if I don't know what those are? Emma smiles. Then that's what we figure out next. The homework this week is different. Emma wants James to write what she calls a values inventory. Not his career goals, not his achievements, his actual values. The principles and priorities that matter to him when he strips away all the shoulds and the expectations and the comparisons. What does he actually care about? What kind of life would feel meaningful to him regardless of how it looked to others? James spends 2 weeks on this assignment. It's harder than anything Emma's asked him to do so far, because he realizes he doesn't actually know what he values. He knows what he's supposed to value. Career success, financial security, social status. But does he actually care about these things? Or has he just spent 42 years pursuing goals other people set for him? He tries to remember the last time he felt genuinely satisfied. Not proud because others were impressed. Not relieved because he'd avoided failure. Actually satisfied. And he realizes it was months ago, maybe longer. He'd helped a junior colleague work through a complex marketing problem. They'd sat together for 2 hours, James explaining different approaches, the colleague asking thoughtful questions, and by the end, they'd cracked it. The solution was elegant, effective, and the colleague had looked at James with genuine gratitude and said, "I learned so much from you today." That had felt good, better than any performance review or salary increase. He'd helped someone, taught them something valuable, made their work better. And it strikes James that this is what he actually values. Not being the most successful person in the room, but being useful, being someone who helps others succeed. This realization shifts something fundamental, because if helping others is what he actually values, then his career isn't a failure at all. He's been useful to dozens of colleagues over 18 years. He's mentored junior staff. He's been reliable. He's made other people's work easier. That's not nothing. That's not wasted potential. That's just not the kind of success that gets featured in Forbes. In their next session, Emma listens to James explain this realization, and she's smiling by the time he finishes. "James, do you hear what you just did? You stopped measuring your worth against Sophie's achievements. You stopped using career advancement as the only metric for a meaningful life. You identified something you genuinely value, and you recognized that you've actually been living in alignment with that value for years. That's enormous progress." She leans back in her chair. Now let's talk about the voice. James knows what she means. The constant internal commentary. The voice that criticizes every decision, predicts every failure, highlights every inadequacy. He'd assumed everyone has this voice. But Emma explains that while everyone has internal dialogue, not everyone has a voice that's consistently negative, harsh, and judgmental. This is what we call negative self-talk, Emma says. And it's one of the most common and most destructive mental habits there is. Here's what makes it so insidious. The voice feels like it's you, like it's your authentic self telling you the truth. But it's not. It's a learned pattern, usually developed in childhood, often in response to criticism from parents, teachers, or peers. Your brain learned that criticizing yourself first was a form of protection. If you beat others to the punch, if you highlighted your own flaws before they could, maybe it would hurt less. James thinks about his parents. Loving people, but working class, proud, determined that their son would have opportunities they never had. Every B grade met with, "Why wasn't it an A?" Every achievement followed by, That's good, but don't get complacent. The message, always, was that being satisfied was dangerous, that you had to keep pushing, keep improving, never rest. They thought they were motivating you, Emma says when James explains this, and maybe it worked for a while, but eventually, you internalized that voice. It became automatic, and now it runs constantly, even though your parents aren't in the room anymore. Even though you're a 42-year-old man who doesn't need that kind of pressure anymore, she explains how to work with negative self-talk, not by trying to stop it or suppress it. That doesn't work. The voice has been running too long to just shut off. Instead, by recognizing it as a voice, as something separate from his true self, by naming it, even giving it a label so he can observe it rather than being consumed by it. Some of my clients actually give the voice a name, Emma says. The critic, the judge. One guy called his Derek, after his overbearing uncle. The point is to create some distance. So when the voice says, "You're going to fail," you can notice, "Oh, that's the critic talking again. That's the old pattern." And then you can choose whether to listen to it or not. For homework, Emma wants James to keep a log for 1 week. Every time he notices the negative voice, he writes down what it said, but he doesn't argue with it or try to change it. Just notices it, just records it. By the end of the week, James has filled 12 pages. The voice is constant, absolutely relentless. But something strange happens through the process of writing it down. The voice starts to feel less true. When it's just in his head, it feels like reality. But when he sees it written on paper, "You're going to mess this up. Everyone will see you're inadequate. You should just give up now." It sounds melodramatic, cruel, and definitely not objective reality. In their next session, Emma introduces a new concept: cognitive distortions. These are systematic errors in thinking, patterns that nearly everyone falls into, but that create unnecessary suffering. All or nothing thinking, Emma explains. This is when you see things in black and white categories. Either you're successful or you're a failure. Either the presentation was perfect or it was terrible. There's no middle ground. But life doesn't actually work that way. Almost everything exists on a spectrum. James realizes he does this constantly. If he doesn't get promoted, he's failed. If a project doesn't go perfectly, it's a disaster. If someone criticizes any aspect of his work, the entire thing is worthless. Overgeneralization, Emma continues. This is when one negative event becomes evidence of a never-ending pattern. This always happens to me. I never get it right. But does it always happen? Have you never gotten it right? Or is your brain taking one incident and inflating it into a universal truth? Mental filtering. This is when you focus exclusively on negative details and filter out positive ones. So if you get 10 pieces of positive feedback and 1 criticism, which one do you remember? Which one do you think about for the next week? James laughs, but it's not really funny. The criticism, obviously. Right, and what does that do over time? It creates a distorted view of reality where you genuinely believe you're doing worse than you actually are, because you're only counting the negatives. Emma goes through several more, jumping to conclusions, catastrophizing, personalization. Each one James recognizes from his own thought patterns. And with each recognition comes a strange sense of relief. Because if these are common distortions, systematic errors that lots of people make, then maybe he's not uniquely broken. Maybe his brain is just doing what poorly trained brains do. The goal, Emma says, isn't to never have these distorted thoughts. They're automatic. They'll keep arising. The goal is to notice them when they happen, to recognize, oh, I'm doing all or nothing thinking right now. I'm catastrophizing. I'm filtering out the positive. And once you notice it, you can question it. Is this thought actually accurate? Or is it just a distortion my brain is producing out of habit? Their sessions continue through spring into summer. James starts to change, slowly, sometimes imperceptibly. He doesn't wake up one day transform, but gradually, week by week, the mental habits that have controlled him for decades begin to loosen their grip. He stops rewriting everything 17 times. Not because he's become careless, but because he's learned the difference between excellence and perfectionism. He submits work that's very good, instead of impossible, perfect, and the world doesn't end. His colleagues don't reject him. His boss doesn't fire him. Life goes on. He starts speaking up more in meetings, not because he's suddenly confident, but because he stopped waiting for absolute certainty before sharing his ideas. He says things that might be wrong, proposes approaches that might not work, and sometimes they don't. And it's fine. Failure isn't death. It's just information. He applies for a senior position that opens up in his company, not because he's sure he'll get it, but because he stopped telling himself he's not ready. The interview is in 3 weeks. He prepares, but he doesn't over-prepare. And when the voice in his head starts its usual routine about how he's going to fail, how he's not senior management material, he notices it, names it. The critic is at it again, and then he chooses not to listen. The morning of the interview, James wakes at 6, makes proper coffee instead of instant, puts on his best suit, takes the tube to work, and for the first time in as long as he can remember, he feels something unexpected. Not confidence exactly, not certainty that he'll succeed, but a quiet sense that regardless of what happens, he's going to be okay. Because his worth isn't dependent on getting this promotion. His value isn't determined by whether these interviewers think he's good enough. He's already good enough, not perfect, not without flaws or limitations, but enough. That's the thing about breaking mental habits. You don't become a different person. You just become yourself without all the unnecessary suffering layered on top. James doesn't get the promotion. The email arrives on a Friday afternoon, 3 days after the interview. Thank you for your interest in the senior marketing manager position. We were impressed by your experience and contributions to the company. However, we've decided to move forward with another candidate whose skill set more closely aligns with our current strategic priorities. The standard rejection template? Polite, professional, meaningless. James reads it twice, sits back in his chair, waits for the familiar collapse. The voice that will tell him he was right to doubt himself, that he's not senior management material, that he'll be stuck in this same position until he retires. He waits for the shame, the disappointment, the crushing confirmation of his inadequacy. But it doesn't come, not in the way he expects. He feels disappointed, certainly. He'd wanted the promotion, prepared for it, imagined what it might be like to finally move up after 18 years. But underneath the disappointment, there's something else. Something he doesn't quite have a name for yet. Not acceptance exactly, more like a perspective. He picks up his phone, calls Emma Richardson. They don't have a session scheduled, but she'd told him he could reach out between appointments if he needed to. She answers after 2 rings. "James, are you all right?" "I didn't get the promotion," he says. And then, surprising himself, "But I think I might actually be okay." There's a pause on the other end. Then Emma's voice, warm with something that sounds like pride. "Tell me what you're feeling right now. Not what you think you should be feeling, what you're actually experiencing." James thinks about it. Disappointed. Definitely disappointed. But not destroyed. That's the word. I expected to feel destroyed. Like this would confirm every negative thing I've ever thought about myself. But it doesn't. It just feels like one thing that didn't work out, one opportunity that wasn't meant for me, not proof that I'm inadequate. James, do you understand what you just did? You experienced a significant disappointment without catastrophizing it, without making it mean something about your fundamental worth. That's enormous progress. That's the growth mindset in action. They talk for 20 minutes. Emma points out something James hadn't considered. The act of applying, of putting himself forward despite his fear, was itself a success, regardless of the outcome, because for years, he hadn't applied for anything. He'd kept himself small, safe, unchallenged. Applying meant he'd broken that pattern. That alone was worth celebrating. After they hang up, James sits quietly at his desk. The office is mostly empty now, just the usual Friday afternoon stragglers. Through the window, he can see the Thames, the late afternoon sun, turning the water gold. And he makes a decision. He's going to leave. Not immediately, not recklessly, but this rejection has clarified something. He's been at this company for 18 years, and clearly, he's gone as far as he's going to go here. They see him a certain way. Reliable, solid, not senior management material. And maybe that's fair. Maybe he hasn't shown them he's capable of more. But also, maybe it doesn't matter. Because if he wants to grow, to challenge himself, to actually test what he's capable of now, that he's starting to break free from his mental limitations, he needs to do it somewhere new. The thought should terrify him. A month ago, it would have. But now, it feels like possibility. Over the weekend, James updates his CV. Not 17 drafts this time, 5. The first one is rough, getting the information down. The second refines the language. The third tightens the structure. The fourth addresses Emma's feedback when he emails it to her. The fifth is final. Good enough. Excellent even. But not perfect. And that's fine. He starts applying to positions. Not just in London. Manchester, Birmingham, Edinburgh, companies he's admired. Roles that would stretch him, challenge him, require him to grow. Each application is practice in managing the voice that says he's not qualified, not ready, not good enough. And each time he hits submit, it gets a little easier. But something else is shifting too. Something deeper than career ambitions. In his sessions with Emma, they've started exploring the habit she calls the comparison trap more thoroughly. And James is beginning to see how much of his life has been shaped by comparing himself to Sophie Chen. How many decisions he's made, or failed to make, based on how they'd measure up against her achievements. What would your life look like, Emma asks during one session, if Sophie Chen didn't exist? If you'd never met her? If you had no one to compare yourself to? James struggles with this question. His entire sense of inadequacy has been built on the foundation of that comparison. Without it, who is he? What would he want? I think, he says slowly, I'd be more interested in teaching, mentoring. I've always enjoyed helping junior colleagues develop their skills, but I've never pursued it formally because it seemed like going backwards, like admitting I couldn't compete at higher levels. Or, Emma suggests, it's recognizing that you value different things than Sophie does. She values building companies, entrepreneurship, industry recognition. You value helping individuals grow, sharing knowledge, making people's work lives better. Neither of those is superior. They're just different values, different definitions of success. This idea sits with James for days. Different definitions of success. What if success isn't a ladder everyone's climbing, where some people are higher and some are lower? What if it's more like a landscape, where people are walking different paths toward different destinations? And comparing your position on your path to someone else's position on their path is meaningless. He starts reaching out to colleagues, not about jobs or promotions, but just to talk. He invites the junior marketing coordinator, a woman named Aisha who's been with the company for 8 months, for coffee. Asks her about her career goals, her challenges, what she's trying to learn. And then he shares what he knows, not showing off, not proving his worth, just genuinely trying to help. Aisha listens intently, taking notes, asking questions, and when they finish, she says something that catches James off guard. I always thought you were unapproachable. You're so quiet in meetings. So, I don't know, contained. But this has been incredibly helpful. Would you be willing to do this regularly? Like, could I come to you when I'm stuck on something? James realizes he's spent 18 years being so afraid of being judged, so focused on not looking incompetent, that he's made himself invisible, unapproachable. People haven't been avoiding him because he's inadequate. They've been avoiding him because he's given off such strong, don't bother me energy that they assumed he didn't want to engage. He starts saying yes more. To coffee meetings, to questions from colleagues, to after-work drinks he'd usually skip. And something unexpected happens. People like him. They seek out his advice. They value his experience, his perspective, his calm, methodical approach to problems. All the things he thought made him boring, forgettable, inadequate, are actually valuable to other people. But the most profound shift happens around what Emma calls negative self-talk. This is the habit James has struggled with most, because the voice isn't just occasional, it's constant. A running commentary on everything he does, and it's almost entirely critical. Emma introduces him to a technique from acceptance and commitment therapy. Instead of trying to stop the voice or argue with it, you practice observing it as if it's a separate entity. You notice the thoughts arising without identifying with them. The goal, Emma explains, isn't to make the voice go away, it's to change your relationship with it. Right now, when the voice says you're not good enough, you believe it. You treat it as truth. But what if you could hear it and think, there's that thought again. How interesting. I wonder why my brain produces that thought. But I don't have to believe it. She gives him a specific exercise. For 2 weeks, every time he notices a self-critical thought, he's to prefix it with the phrase, I'm having the thought that. So instead of I'm not good enough, it becomes I'm having the thought that I'm not good enough. Instead of I'm going to fail, it becomes I'm having the thought that I'm going to fail. It sounds trivial, but the linguistic shift creates psychological distance. The thought becomes something he's observing rather than something he is. James practices this religiously. At first, he has to stop and consciously rephrase things, but gradually, it becomes more automatic, and something remarkable happens. The thoughts lose their power. When he hears, "I'm having the thought that this presentation won't be good enough," it sounds different than "this presentation won't be good enough." The first is clearly just a thought, a mental event, something his brain produced. The second feels like reality. He starts noticing patterns. The voice is loudest when he's tired, when he's hungry, when he's comparing himself to others, when he's about to do something new or challenging. It's not random. It's a conditioned response to certain triggers. And once he sees the pattern, he can prepare for it. Before important meetings, he makes sure he's well rested, well fed, centered, not to make the voice go away, but to be in a state where he can observe it without being controlled by it. One evening, about 4 months into his work with Emma, James has what he'll later think of as a breakthrough moment. He's walking home from the tube station. It's one of those perfect London summer evenings where the light is golden and the air is warm, and he realizes something startling. He's happy, not accomplishment happy, not something good just happened happy, just content, present, walking through his neighborhood, noticing the flowers in people's gardens, hearing children playing in the park, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face, and thinking, this is nice. This moment, right now, is nice. When did he stop noticing moments like this? When did his happiness become entirely contingent on external achievements, on measuring up to imagined standards, on being better than he was yesterday, or better than Sophie Chen, or better than whoever? He calls Emma the next day and tells her about this moment. "I was just walking," he says, "and I felt happy for no reason. Is that normal?" Emma laughs, genuinely delighted. "James, that's not just normal. That's the whole point. Most people spend their entire lives postponing happiness until they achieve the next goal, reach the next milestone, become the person they think they should be. But happiness isn't a destination. It's not something you earn by being successful enough or good enough. It's your natural state when you stop all the mental habits that cover it up." She explains the concept of hedonic adaptation. Humans quickly adjust to both positive and negative changes in their circumstances. You get a promotion, and within a few weeks, it feels normal. The happiness fades. You buy a bigger house, and within months, you're used to it. External changes in circumstances produce temporary emotional changes, but they don't create lasting happiness. What creates lasting well-being, Emma says, isn't changing your circumstances. It's changing how you relate to your circumstances. And that's what you've been doing. You haven't become more successful. You haven't fixed all your problems. You've just stopped making yourself miserable with unhelpful thinking patterns. This reframe is revolutionary for James. He'd always believed he'd be happy when he got promoted, when he earned more money, when he was as successful as Sophie Chen, when he finally became the person he should be. But that one never arrives. There's always another goal, another milestone, another way he's falling short. But if happiness isn't contingent on external achievement, if it's actually accessible right now by simply relating differently to his experience, then everything changes. Over the following weeks, James experiments with this idea. He practices what Emma calls savoring. Instead of rushing through pleasant moments on his way to the next task, he pauses, notices, appreciates the first sip of good coffee in the morning, the satisfaction of solving a complex problem, the warmth of sun through the office window, small moments he's been skipping past for decades. And something shifts in his nervous system. He feels less driven by urgency, less propelled by the endless sense that he's behind, inadequate, running out of time. There's nowhere to get to. He's already here. And here is, surprisingly, pretty good. But Emma warns him about one of the most stubborn mental habits: procrastination. This is the habit that's kept James from applying for new opportunities, from pursuing teaching or mentoring more formally, from taking risks that might lead to growth. Procrastination, Emma explains in one session, isn't about laziness or poor time management. It's emotional avoidance. You're not avoiding the task. You're avoiding the uncomfortable feelings associated with the task, anxiety about whether you'll do it well, fear of failure, uncertainty about the outcome. And your brain has learned that avoidance provides temporary relief from those uncomfortable feelings. She draws another diagram. Here's how it works. You think about applying for a new job. Immediately, anxiety arises. What if I'm not qualified? What if they reject me? What if I fail? That anxiety feels bad. So your brain says, let's do something else that feels better right now. You check email, browse social media, organize your desk, anything that provides relief from that anxious feeling. And in the short term, it works. You feel better. But in the long term, you reinforce the pattern. Your brain learns that avoidance equals relief. And the next time you think about applying for a job, the anxiety will be even stronger because now you also have guilt about procrastinating. James recognizes this pattern immediately. He's been telling himself he'll apply for teaching positions when the time is right for months now. But the time is never right. There's always a reason to wait. Too busy at work. Should update his CV first. Should get more experience. Should wait until. The only way to break procrastination, Emma says, is to do the thing while feeling the uncomfortable feelings. Not after they go away, because they won't. While you're feeling anxious, uncertain, afraid, you take action anyway. And what you discover is that the anticipation is almost always worse than the reality. And even if it's difficult, you survive. And your brain learns a new pattern. Discomfort isn't dangerous. It's just uncomfortable. And you can tolerate discomfort in service of things you value. For homework, Emma gives James what she calls the 5-minute rule. When he notices he's procrastinating on something important, he has to work on it for just 5 minutes. That's all. 5 minutes. If after 5 minutes he wants to stop, he can. No judgment. James tries this with his teaching position applications. He tells himself he just has to research one program, just 5 minutes. But what he discovers is that starting is the hardest part. Once he's 5 minutes in, he usually keeps going. Not because it's suddenly easy or comfortable, but because the anxiety he was avoiding isn't actually that bad once he's in motion. He applies to 3 teaching programs, part-time positions where he could mentor young marketing professionals while keeping his day job. One in London, one online, one at a business school in Manchester that would require commuting once a week, but would allow him to reconnect with his hometown. While waiting to hear back, James continues his sessions with Emma. They're working on the last major mental habit now, the fixed mindset. This is the belief that his capabilities are essentially fixed, that he is who he is, and fundamental change isn't really possible. You've already disproven this, Emma points out. You've changed significantly over the past 6 months, but there's a part of you that still believes change is limited, that maybe you can adjust some behaviors, but your essential nature, your potential, your ceiling, those are predetermined. Yes? James nods slowly. I suppose I do think that. I mean, I'm 42. How much can someone really change at this point? Emma smiles. How much? Enormously. James, do you know about neuroplasticity? Your brain continues forming new neural connections throughout your entire life. Every time you learn something, practice something, change a habit, you're literally restructuring your brain. There's no age cutoff. The idea that people can't change significantly after a certain age is completely contradicted by neuroscience research. She pulls up a study on her tablet. This research followed adults who learned new skills in their 50s, 60s, 70s, musical instruments, new languages, complex cognitive tasks. And what they found is that these people didn't just learn the skills, their brains physically changed, new neural pathways formed, cognitive abilities improved, not just in the specific skill they were learning, but across multiple domains. James feels something like hope stirring. So I could actually become different? Not just manage my thoughts better, but genuinely develop new capabilities. Not just could, you already are. The James who walked into our first session 6 months ago wouldn't have applied for that promotion, wouldn't have updated his CV, wouldn't have reached out to colleagues to mentor them, wouldn't have noticed a beautiful evening and felt happy for no reason. That person was limited by fixed mindset beliefs about who he was and what he was capable of. But you've been proving those beliefs wrong, one small action at a time. The conversation turns to what psychologists call learned helplessness. This is when repeated failures, or even just the belief that you're likely to fail, creates a pattern where you stop trying. You learn that your actions don't matter, that outcomes are beyond your control. So why bother? James recognizes this in how he approached his career for years. He stopped applying for promotions because he believed he wasn't the type of person who got promoted. He stopped proposing innovative ideas because he believed they'd be rejected. He stopped taking risks because he believed they wouldn't pay off. Not because he'd tested these beliefs recently, but because old experiences had taught him to expect failure, and those expectations became self-fulfilling prophecies. The opposite of learned helplessness, Emma explains, is learned agency. This is when you have repeated experiences of your actions producing desired outcomes. You try something, it works. You face a challenge, you overcome it. You set a goal, you achieve it. And over time, you develop a deep belief that your efforts matter, that you can influence your circumstances, that you have agency in your own life. She gestures toward James. Every time you've taken action these past months, despite your fear, you've been building learned agency. Every application you submitted, every mentoring conversation you had, every time you did something imperfectly and survived, you're teaching your brain a new pattern, that you can try things, that you can handle setbacks, that you have more capability than you thought. In August, almost 6 months after his first session with Emma, James gets an email. It's from the London Teaching Programme, a continuing education initiative that trains professionals to teach marketing courses to adult learners. They're offering him a position. Starting in September, he'd teach 1 evening course per week, Introduction to Digital Marketing Strategy. The pay is modest, but that's not really the point. The point is, they want him. They think he has something valuable to offer. They believe he can teach, can help others, can contribute meaningfully to people's professional development. James accepts immediately. His first class is on a Tuesday evening in early September. 23 students, adults ranging from their 20s to their 50s, all trying to update their skills or change careers. As James stands at the front of the classroom, he feels the familiar anxiety rising. The voice starts its usual routine. You don't know what you're doing. They're going to see through you. You're going to fail. But this time, he notices it. I'm having the thought that I don't know what I'm doing. The thought is there, but he's not the thought. He's the person observing the thought. And from that place of observation, he can choose how to respond. He takes a breath, looks at the faces in front of him. Real people, with real goals and challenges and hopes. People he might actually be able to help. And he begins. Good evening, everyone. My name is James Whitmore. I've been working in marketing for 18 years. And I'm not going to pretend I know everything, because I don't. What I do know, I've learned mostly by making mistakes and figuring out how to fix them. So that's what we're going to focus on in this course. Not theory, not perfection, but practical skills, real applications, and learning from failures, including mine. The class goes well, not perfectly. He loses his place twice, stumbles over a technical explanation, forgets to cover one of the topics he'd planned. But the students are engaged. They ask good questions. They share their own experiences. And by the end of the 90 minutes, James feels something he hasn't felt in years. Energized. Not drained by anxiety, but energized by connection, by teaching, by helping people understand something they didn't understand before. After class, 3 students approach with questions. He stays an extra 30 minutes, talking through their specific challenges, sharing resources, offering encouragement. And when he finally leaves, walking through London's September evening toward the tube station, he realizes something profound. This is what he's been looking for. Not promotion, not matching Sophie Chen's achievements, not proving his worth to anyone. Just this. Being useful, helping people, teaching, contributing. He texts Emma, "First class done. I think I found my thing." She replies immediately, "I always knew you would. Proud of you, James." That night, James can't sleep. But for once, it's not anxiety keeping him awake. It's possibility, ideas, plans. He's thinking about developing more courses, maybe eventually leaving his corporate job entirely, teaching full-time, or starting a consultancy focused on mentoring early career marketers, or writing a course curriculum. Or the future, for the first time in decades, feels open, full of possibilities instead of predetermined limitations. And the most amazing thing is that nothing about his external circumstances has fundamentally changed. He's still in the same flat, the same city, working mostly the same job. But his internal experience is completely different. The mental habits that imprisoned him for 42 years, they're still there. He still overthinks sometimes, still falls into perfectionism, still compares himself to others, still hears the critical voice. but they don't control him anymore. They're just weather patterns passing through his mind, thoughts he can observe, acknowledge, and choose not to obey. This is what freedom actually feels like, James realizes. Not the absence of negative thoughts, not the achievement of perfect confidence, just the ability to notice what's happening in your mind and choose your response, instead of being automatically controlled by it. In October, James finally has coffee with Sophie Chen again. She'd sent him a message weeks ago suggesting they catch up, and for once, he didn't spend days overthinking his response. He just said yes. They meet at the same cafe near Canary Wharf. Sophie orders her flat white. James gets an Americano. They sit by the window, and for the first few minutes, there's awkward small talk. The weather, work, mutual acquaintances. Then Sophie says, "You seem different." James looks up from his coffee. Different how? I don't know. Lighter? Less? Tense? What's changed? And James finds himself telling her about therapy with Emma, about recognizing his mental habits, about learning to separate thoughts from reality, about teaching, about starting to figure out what he actually wants instead of just trying to measure up to what he thinks he should want. Sophie listens without interrupting, and when he finishes, she's quiet for a moment. Then she says something that surprises him. "I'm jealous." James laughs. "You're jealous? Of what?" "Of the work you're doing. The internal work. I've been so focused on building the business, on external success, that I haven't really dealt with any of my stuff. I'm still running on fear half the time. Fear of failure. Fear of being found out. Fear that if I stop pushing so hard, everything will collapse. Emma helped me start that process 3 years ago, but I stopped going to therapy once the business took off. I told myself I was too busy. But really, I think I was afraid that if I looked too closely at my motivations, I'd discover I'm not as driven as I pretend to be, that maybe I'm just running away from something." James stares at her. This is Sophie Chen, the woman he's measured himself against for 2 decades. The standard of success he's felt perpetually inadequate compared to, and she's admitting that she's struggling, that she's afraid, that her achievements haven't made her happy or secure or free from doubt. "Maybe we're all just making it up as we go," James says quietly, "pretending we know what we're doing, hoping no one notices we're terrified." Sophie smiles. "But it's sad. Probably. But at least you're doing something about it. You're actually changing, growing. I'm just running faster on the same treadmill." They talk for another hour. Really talk, for the first time since their 20s. About their lives, their regrets, their hopes. And when they part ways, James doesn't feel inadequate anymore. He feels something closer to compassion. For Sophie, who's so successful but so stressed. And for himself, who spent so long comparing his behind the scenes to her highlight reel. That evening, James has his regular session with Emma. He tells her about the coffee with Sophie, about this shift in how he sees her. "I think," he says slowly, working it out as he speaks, "I've spent 20 years being jealous of Sophie's success, but I never wanted her life. I wanted my life to feel as successful as I imagined hers felt, but her life doesn't feel the way I imagined. And even if it did, it wouldn't change anything about my worth or my potential." Emma nods. That's the comparison trap, completely dismantled. You've realized that her path and your path are separate, that her achievements don't diminish yours. That success isn't a competition. This is huge, James. They talk about what comes next. James has been seeing Emma weekly for 7 months now. The work they've done together has been transformative, but Emma suggests they start thinking about transitioning, maybe meeting every 2 weeks instead of weekly, then monthly. Not because the work is done, but because James has developed the tools to manage his own mental patterns now. The goal of therapy, Emma says, isn't to make you dependent on me. It's to teach you skills you can use independently. And you're there, James? You know how to recognize cognitive distortions. You know how to challenge unhelpful thoughts. You know how to manage anxiety and take action despite fear. You've rebuilt your entire relationship with failure and success and self-worth. You're ready. James feels a pang of loss. These sessions have been a lifeline, but he also knows she's right. He doesn't need weekly therapy anymore. He needs to practice living with these new mental patterns, integrating them fully into his life. They agree to meet every 2 weeks for the next few months, then reassess. By December, James has taught 20 classes. He's developed a reputation among students as supportive but rigorous. someone who gives honest feedback, but makes people feel capable of improvement. His course evaluations are excellent. The program asks if he'd like to teach a second course in the new year. He says yes. At work, he's still in the same position, but he's stopped seeing that as failure. He's doing good work, mentoring junior colleagues, contributing value. And if he never gets promoted here, that's fine. This job funds his life while he builds something more meaningful on the side. That's enough. On Christmas Eve, James takes the train up to Manchester to spend the holiday with his mother. It's the first time he's gone home for Christmas in 3 years. Usually he makes excuses, unable to face her questions about his career, his achievements, his lack of wife or children, or property ownership. But this year, when she asks those questions, they don't land the same way. Still at the same job? She asks while they're preparing dinner. There's concern in her voice, though she's trying to hide it. Yeah, James says, chopping carrots, but I'm also teaching now. Evening classes, marketing courses for adult learners. I really love it. His mother stops stirring the pot and looks at him, really looks at him. You seem happy, she says, and there's surprise in her voice. Different than last time I saw you. I am, James realizes. I actually am happy. She doesn't ask about promotion or salary or comparing himself to cousins or childhood friends. She just smiles and says, good. That's all I've ever wanted for you, you know? For you to be happy. And James wonders if maybe that's all she ever wanted. If maybe all those years of, why wasn't it an A, and don't get complacent, were just her way of trying to ensure he'd have a good life. And maybe he heard it as criticism, as proof he'd never be good enough, when really it was just love, expressed awkwardly. Mental habits don't just exist in individuals, they exist in families, in relationships, patterns of communication that run so automatically no one realizes they're there. But now that James can see his own patterns, he's starting to see patterns everywhere, and seeing them is the first step to changing them. On New Year's Eve, James is alone in his flat. Not lonely, just alone. He pours a glass of wine and sits by the window, watching fireworks bloom over London. And he thinks about the year that's passed, the mental habits he's broken, the life he's starting to build, the person he's becoming. He's 43 years old. In one sense, he's late to this realization. He spent 4 decades trapped by thought patterns that limited his potential, his happiness, his sense of possibility. But in another sense, he's right on time, because now he has the tools, the awareness, the skills to live the rest of his life differently. The mental habits that destroy your potential don't announce themselves. They don't feel like habits. They feel like reality, like truth, like just the way things are. And that's what makes them so destructive. You can spend your entire life imprisoned by thoughts you don't even realize are optional. But they are optional, all of them. Overthinking, perfectionism, fear of failure, the comparison trap, negative self-talk, procrastination, fixed mindset. These aren't permanent features of who you are. They're learned patterns, and what's learned can be unlearned. It takes work, real work, the kind of work James has been doing with Emma for 7 months. But it's possible, at any age, in any circumstances. You can change, you can grow, you can break free from mental habits you've had for decades and build new ones that actually serve you. As the clock strikes midnight and London erupts in celebration, James makes a resolution, not the usual kind. Not about losing weight or saving money or achieving some external goal, but an internal commitment. To keep noticing his thoughts instead of being controlled by them, to keep taking action despite fear, to keep choosing growth over comfort, to keep building a life that feels meaningful to him, regardless of how it looks to others, and to remember, always, that he has a choice. In every moment, he can choose which mental habits to feed and which to starve, which thoughts to believe, and which to observe and let pass. That's what freedom actually is. Not the absence of difficult thoughts or challenging circumstances, but the ability to choose your response, to choose who you want to become. James raises his glass to the London skyline and whispers to himself, here's to year 1, the first year of the rest of his life, the first year of living with awareness instead of automaticity, the first year of becoming who he actually is instead of who he thinks he should be. And it's only just beginning. 6 months later, June 2020, the world has changed in ways no one could have predicted. A pandemic has locked down cities, emptied offices, turned life as everyone knew it upside down. James, like millions of others, is working from home. His flat in Waterloo has become his office, his classroom, his entire universe. But something unexpected has happened during this global crisis. While many people are struggling with isolation, with anxiety about the future, with the loss of structure and normalcy, James is okay. Better than okay, actually. He's handling it, not because he's immune to stress, not because he doesn't feel the weight of uncertainty, but because he has tools now, mental habits that help him process difficulty without being overwhelmed by it. When the lockdown first started in March, when his company transitioned everyone to remote work and his teaching moved to virtual classrooms, James felt the familiar anxiety rising. The voice in his head started its predictable routine. You can't handle this. Everything's falling apart. You're going to lose your job. The economy's collapsing. Your whole life is unraveling. But this time, he heard it differently. I'm having the thought that everything's falling apart. And from that place of observation, he could ask, is that actually true? Or is that just my brain's catastrophizing habit? The reality was less dramatic than the thought. Yes, things were uncertain. Yes, the situation was difficult, but nothing was actually falling apart. He still had his job, his health, his flat. His teaching position had moved online, but it still existed. He was fundamentally safe, even if he didn't feel completely comfortable. This distinction between actual danger and perceived threat has become crucial. Emma had taught him this early on. Your brain evolved to prioritize survival, so it's biased toward detecting threats. It would rather have you panic about something that's not actually dangerous than miss a real threat. But in the modern world, this means your nervous system is constantly sounding alarms about situations that aren't actually life-threatening. Understanding this doesn't make anxiety disappear, but it creates space around the anxiety. Room to feel it without being controlled by it. Room to act despite it. James establishes new routines. Morning walks before work, now that there's no commute. Regular video calls with colleagues, not just for work, but for connection. Virtual coffee breaks with his teaching students, checking in on how they're coping. Weekly sessions with Emma, still meeting every 2 weeks, but now via video like everything else. And something surprising emerges during these months of isolation. James discovers that he's actually good in a crisis, not in the heroic, dramatic sense, but in the steady, reliable sense. While others are panicking, spiraling into worst-case scenarios, James is problem-solving, breaking down challenges into manageable pieces, finding small things he can control when most things feel uncontrollable. His colleagues start reaching out to him. I don't know why, but talking to you makes me feel calmer. One woman tells him during a video call, you just seem so grounded. James almost laughs. Grounded. Him, the person who spent 4 decades anxious, overthinking, comparing himself to others, convinced he was inadequate. But he realizes that's exactly the point. He's grounded now because he's done the work, because he's spent the last year learning to manage his mind instead of being managed by it. In July, something happens that tests everything he's learned. His company announces redundancies. 20% of staff will be let go, and given his lack of recent promotion, his 18 years of being solid but not senior management material, James knows he's at risk. A year ago, this news would have destroyed him, confirmed every fear, proven the critical voice right. He's not good enough. Never was. Now it's being revealed for everyone to see. But now, in July 2020, James's response is different. He feels afraid, certainly. Worried about finances, about finding a new job during a pandemic, about the uncertainty. But he doesn't catastrophize. He doesn't spiral. He doesn't let the fear paralyze him. Instead, he does something that would have been impossible for the old James. He reaches out to his boss, David, and asks for an honest conversation about his position. Is he at risk? What would make him more valuable to the company? What does he need to do? The conversation is uncomfortable. David is honest in ways he hasn't been before. James, you're excellent at execution, but you've never really stepped up as a leader. You don't take initiative. You don't propose new directions. You do what you're asked, and you do it well. But in a crisis, we need people who can see around corners, who can innovate, and I haven't seen that from you. A year ago, this feedback would have confirmed James's worst beliefs about himself. Now, he hears it as information, data, a description of behaviors, not a judgment of his fundamental worth. What if I started showing you that? James asks. What would that look like? David seems surprised by the question, by James's calm directness. They talk for another 20 minutes, and by the end, James has a plan. He's going to propose a new initiative, something he's been thinking about but never had the courage to suggest. A mentorship program for junior staff, formal training and development that doesn't currently exist in the company, something that addresses the skills gap David's been complaining about for years. James spends 2 weeks developing the proposal. Not 17 drafts this time, 5 focused iterations. He gets feedback from Emma, from his teaching colleagues, from 2 junior staff members he's been informally mentoring. He builds a business case showing ROI, resource requirements, implementation timeline, and then he presents it to David and 2 senior leaders. The presentation isn't perfect. He stumbles over one section, forgets to mention a key point he'd planned to make, has to admit he doesn't know the answer to one technical question, but he doesn't let these imperfections derail him. He stays present, engaged, authentic. At the end, there's a long pause. Then David says, "This is good, James. Really good. This is the kind of thinking we need right now." 2 weeks later, the redundancy list is announced. James's name isn't on it. More than that, he's asked to lead the implementation of the mentorship program. It's not a promotion exactly, but it's a new responsibility. Recognition. A chance to do the work he actually cares about. When James tells Emma during their next session, she's smiling before he finishes. Do you see what you just did? You identified something you could control. You took action despite fear. You dealt with imperfection and failure moments without letting them stop you. You proved to yourself that you can handle difficult situations. That's not luck, James. That's growth. By autumn, the mentorship program is running. James is working with 6 junior staff members, providing structured guidance, teaching them skills he's developed over 18 years. And he's loving it. This is the work that gives him energy, the work that feels meaningful. His teaching has expanded too. The adult education program asks him to develop a second course, Advanced Digital Strategy. And he's been approached by 2 other institutions about teaching positions. Nothing full-time yet, but the momentum is building. One evening in October, James is preparing for a class when his phone rings. It's Sophie Chen. They've stayed in touch since their coffee in October the previous year. Occasional messages, a few video calls during lockdown, but they haven't talked in weeks. "James, I need advice," she says without preamble. "I'm thinking about selling the company." James is surprised. "Really? Why?" "Because I'm exhausted. I built this thing, and it's successful by any external measure, but I'm not happy. I work 70 hours a week. I haven't had a holiday in 3 years. I've built a life that looks impressive from the outside, but feels empty from the inside. And I realized recently that I don't actually want this anymore. Maybe I never did. Maybe I just wanted to prove I could do it." She pauses. "You remember what you said last year? About figuring out what you actually want, instead of what you think you should want? I can't stop thinking about that. So I started therapy again. With Emma, actually. And I'm realizing I built this company partially to prove something. To myself, to my parents, to everyone who thought I couldn't do it. But once you've proven something, what's the point of continuing to do it if it's making you miserable?" James listens as Sophie talks about her plans. She's considering selling to a larger firm, using the money to take time off, figure out what she wants to do next, without the pressure of investors and employees and quarterly targets. Maybe travel, maybe write, maybe teach. She doesn't know yet, and for the first time in her life, she's okay with not knowing. "I think I've been chasing success for so long that I forgot to ask if it's the right kind of success," Sophie says. "You were smarter than me, James. You stayed in a job that maybe looked boring from the outside, but you figured out how to make it meaningful. You found the work you actually care about. I'm 40 now, and I'm just starting that process." After they hang up, James sits quietly for a long time. He thinks about the years he spent comparing himself to Sophie, believing her life was better, her choices smarter, her path more impressive, and all that time she was struggling with her own doubts, her own fears, her own sense of inadequacy. Everyone is fighting battles you know nothing about. Everyone is comparing their behind the scenes to everyone else's highlight reel. Everyone thinks they're uniquely broken while everyone else has it figured out. But no one has it figured out. They're all just making it up as they go, trying to manage their own mental habits, wrestling with their own limitations. The comparison trap isn't just destructive because it makes you feel inadequate. It's destructive because it's based on a complete fiction. You're comparing your full reality to other people's carefully curated images. It's like comparing a rough draft to a published book and concluding you can't write. In November, James has what will be his last regular session with Emma. After a year and a half of work together, they've agreed he's ready to transition to maintenance sessions, check-ins every few months, rather than regular therapy. "I want to do something a bit different today," Emma says at the start of the session. "I want you to talk to yourself, the version of yourself from 2 years ago. March 2019, the morning of that presentation when you were sitting at your desk, rewriting it for the 17th time, convinced you were going to fail. What would you say to him now?" James thinks about this, tries to picture that version of himself. The anxiety, the self-doubt, the absolute certainty that he was inadequate and always would be. "I think I'd tell him that the voice in his head is lying," James says slowly. "That all the things it's telling him about himself, that he's not good enough, that he's wasted his potential, that it's too late to change, none of that is true. It's just noise, old programming, mental habits that can be changed. What else? I'd tell him that applying for things and being rejected doesn't prove he's inadequate. It just proves he's willing to try. That failure isn't death, it's information. And that the only real failure is never trying because you're too afraid of failing." James pauses, feeling emotion rising in his throat. I'd tell him that 18 years in the same job doesn't mean he's wasted his life. It means he's been stable, reliable, valuable to dozens of colleagues who've learned from him. And that it's okay if his definition of success is different from other people's. That helping others grow is just as valuable as building million-pound companies. More valuable, maybe, because it's what he actually cares about. "And what would you tell him about Sophie Chen?" Emma asks gently. "I'd tell him to stop comparing himself to her. That her path and his path are completely different. That her achievements don't diminish his worth. That you can be happy for someone else's success without it meaning anything about your own value. And that actually, Sophie is struggling with her own demons. Everyone is. No one has it figured out as much as they appear to." "Last question," Emma says. "What would you tell him about the next 2 years? About therapy? About change? About the possibility of becoming someone different?" James takes a long breath. "I'd tell him it's going to be hard, really hard. That looking at your own mental patterns, seeing how you've been sabotaging yourself for decades, that's painful. That changing habits you've had your entire life takes consistent effort, and you'll fail a lot before you succeed. But I'd also tell him it's worth it. That on the other side of that work is freedom. Not the absence of difficult thoughts, but the ability to notice them without being controlled by them. That he can be 43, 45, 50 years old and still grow, still change, still become someone he couldn't have imagined being." Emma is quiet for a moment. Then she says, "James, I've worked with hundreds of clients over 25 years, and I can tell you that what you've done is remarkable. Not because you've achieved some external success or solved all your problems, but because you've fundamentally changed your relationship with yourself. You've learned to be kind to yourself, to accept imperfection, to take action despite fear. Those are the skills that create lasting well-being. And you've mastered them." They talk about maintenance going forward. James will reach out if he needs support, but Emma expects he won't need much. He has the tools. He's done the work. Now he just needs to keep practicing, keep applying, keep living with these new mental habits until they're as automatic as the old ones were. As the session ends, Emma says one more thing. "You know, when Sophie first referred you to me, she said you reminded her of how she used to be. Stuck, afraid, convinced you'd wasted your potential. And I remember thinking that if you were willing to do the work, you could change significantly. But I had no idea how much. You've exceeded every expectation, James. You should be proud of that." After they say goodbye, James sits with that for a while. Proud. When was the last time he felt proud of himself? Not relieved that he hadn't failed, not grateful that things had worked out, actually proud of who he was and what he'd accomplished. Maybe never. Maybe this is the first time in his entire life. That evening, James writes, not for work or for teaching, just for himself. He writes about the mental habits that destroyed his potential for 42 years, about how he recognized them, challenged them, changed them, about what he learned in the process. He writes about overthinking, and how it's not about being thorough but about being terrified of making decisions, about perfectionism, and how it's not about high standards but about avoiding vulnerability, about the fear of failure, and how it transforms every challenge into an identity test. He writes about the comparison trap and how it makes you compete in races you never signed up for toward finish lines you don't actually care about negative self-talk, and how the voice that feels like your authentic truth is actually just old programming, about procrastination and how it's not laziness but emotional avoidance. And he writes about the fixed mindset, the belief that you are who you are and change is limited or impossible, the lie that destroys potential more thoroughly than any external obstacle ever could. By the time he finishes, it's past midnight. He has 20 pages. It's raw, unpolished, probably too personal, but it's true. It's his experience, his transformation. On impulse, he sends it to Emma, not asking for feedback, he writes in the email, just wanted to share. Thank you for everything. She responds the next morning, James, this is powerful. Have you thought about sharing it more widely? Others would benefit from hearing this. The idea plants itself. Over the following weeks, James can't stop thinking about it. What if he turned this into something? Not a book, maybe, but a blog, a course, something that helps others recognize their own mental habits before spending decades trapped by them. He starts writing more, expanding his personal story into teaching material. Drawing on research he learns from Emma, from his own reading, from psychology journals. He creates a framework. 7 mental habits that destroy potential. How to recognize them. How to challenge them. How to change them. By Christmas, he has a rough manuscript, 50 pages, not publishable yet, but something real, something that exists outside his head. He shows it to his mother during Christmas dinner. She reads it that evening while he cleans up the kitchen, and when he comes into the living room, she's crying. Mum, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, she says, wiping her eyes. I never knew. Ew, you were struggling like this. All those years. I thought you were fine, doing well. I had no idea you were in so much pain. James sits next to her. I didn't know how to talk about it. I thought if I admitted I was struggling, it would prove I was weak, that I'd failed somehow. His mother takes his hand. I'm sorry if I made you feel that way. If my pushing you to do better, to not settle, if that came across as criticism, I was just so proud of you for getting to university, for getting that London job. I wanted you to have every opportunity, but maybe I made you feel like nothing was ever good enough. It wasn't your fault, James says. I created the voice in my head. I'm responsible for that. But yes, some of it probably came from messages I received growing up. From you, from teachers, from culture. But that's how mental habits form, right? We absorb patterns from our environment, and then we spend our lives acting them out unconsciously, until we become conscious, and then we can change. They talk for hours that evening, really talk, in ways they haven't since James was a child, about his father, who died when James was 19, about her fears for him, her hopes, about the pressure she felt to raise him right after his father was gone, about how parenting is just making your best guess based on your own unhealed wounds and hoping you don't damage your children too much. I think everyone's just doing their best, James says. And everyone's mental habits are interacting with everyone else's mental habits. And mostly we're all just trying to survive, to be loved, to feel like we matter. We just have really terrible strategies for getting those needs met. His mother laughs through tears. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise, James says. I just spent 18 months in therapy learning to notice my thoughts instead of being controlled by them. Anyone can do this. That's the whole point. As 2021 begins, James is teaching 3 courses, working full-time at his company, now leading the mentorship program that's become one of their most successful initiatives, writing in the early mornings before work, living alone but not lonely, single but not desperate for partnership, 43 years old and finally feeling like his life is his own. In March, exactly 2 years after that pivotal presentation where he met Sophie for coffee, James gets an unexpected email. It's from a small publishing house that specializes in psychology and self-help. Someone, he never learns who, forwarded them his manuscript about mental habits. They want to talk about publishing it. James stares at the email for a full minute. Then he notices the familiar anxiety rising. The voice starting its routine. This is a mistake. They'll realize you're not a real writer. You're not qualified to give advice. Who are you to think you have something worth saying? And he smiles, because he can hear it now. I'm having the thought that I'm not qualified. Just a thought. Just a mental habit. Not truth. He replies to the email, sets up a call, says yes. 6 months later, in September 2021, James holds the first copy of his book, The Mental Habits That Destroy Your Potential, A Personal Journey from Paralysis to Freedom. It's not a bestseller. It doesn't make him famous or wealthy, but it reaches people. He gets emails from readers who recognize themselves in his story, who realize they're not uniquely broken, who start their own therapy, their own process of noticing and changing their mental habits. One email particularly moves him. It's from a woman in Manchester, 56 years old, who writes, "I thought it was too late for me to change. I thought I was just anxious, just a worrier, just someone who wasn't meant to be happy. But reading your book, I realized these are habits, learned patterns, and if you changed at 42, maybe I can change at 56. I called a therapist today. Thank you for showing me it's possible." This, James realizes, is what he's been looking for his entire life. Not achievement, not external success, not being as accomplished as Sophie Chen or impressing his mother or proving the critical voice wrong. Just this, being useful, helping people, making someone's life a little bit better because he's shared what he's learned. In December 2021, James makes a decision. He's going to leave his corporate job. After 19 years, he's ready for something new. The teaching has grown enough that he can make it work financially. Between 3 courses, some consulting work, and modest book royalties, he'll be okay. Not wealthy, but okay. His last day at the company is in January 2022. His colleagues throw him a small leaving party via Zoom, still working remotely because of the pandemic. They give speeches about how he's mentored them, helped them, made their work better. Someone says, "James always made time for us. He never made us feel stupid for asking questions. He's the person who made this place feel less corporate and more human." David, his boss for all 19 years, says something that surprises him. "I know I didn't promote you as much as you deserve, James. I saw you as someone who executed well but didn't lead. But I was wrong. You were leading all along, just not in the ways I was trained to recognize. You led by making people feel capable, by teaching instead of commanding, by being consistent and kind. That's leadership. I just didn't see it." After the call ends, James closes his laptop, looks around his flat, his life, and he feels something he's not sure he's ever felt before. Complete. Not perfect. Not without challenges or difficulties or moments of doubt, but complete. Whole. Like all the pieces of himself that were scattered and disconnected have finally come together into something coherent. He picks up his phone, texts Emma. Last day at the corporate job, starting full-time teaching next week. Terrified and excited. "Thank you for everything." She replies, "You're going to be brilliant. And remember, being terrified doesn't mean you're making a mistake. It just means you're doing something that matters." That evening, James goes for a walk. It's one of those clear January nights where London feels almost magical, cold and bright, and alive. He walks along the Thames, watching the lights reflect on the water, thinking about the journey that brought him here. 2 years and 10 months ago, he was sitting at his desk, rewriting a presentation for the 17th time, absolutely convinced he was inadequate, and always would be, trapped by mental habits he didn't even know were habits, comparing himself to Sophie Chen and finding himself wanting, listening to a critical voice and believing it was truth. Now, he's someone different. Not completely different, the old patterns still arise. Overthinking, perfectionism, the comparison trap, the critical voice, they haven't disappeared, probably never will. They're too deeply wired into his neural pathways, but they don't control him anymore. They're just weather, thoughts passing through his mind, and he's learned to watch them pass without getting swept away. That's what freedom actually is, not the absence of difficult thoughts, but the ability to notice them, acknowledge them, and choose your response. James stops on Westminster Bridge, looks out at the Thames, at the city he's lived in for 2 decades. And he thinks about everyone out there, in all those buildings, all those lives, carrying their own mental habits, their own limiting beliefs, their own critical voices. Most of them don't know these are habits. They think this is just who they are, just the way their mind works. They'll spend their entire lives trapped by thought patterns that feel like reality, but are actually optional. But some of them, like he did, will have a moment of recognition. They'll hear about therapy or read a book or have a conversation that cracks open a possibility. The possibility that they could be different, could think differently, could live differently. And if they're willing to do the work, the uncomfortable, difficult, worthwhile work of examining their own minds and changing their automatic patterns, they can break free. At any age. In any circumstances. That's the message James wants to share. Not that life will be perfect if you fix your mental habits. Not that all your problems will disappear if you think more positively, but that you have more control than you think. More choice. More potential. The mental habits that destroy your potential are invisible until you learn to see them. But once you see them, once you recognize them as habits rather than truths, everything changes. You can spend 40 years trapped in patterns that limit you, or you can spend 40 years growing, evolving, becoming more of who you actually are. The choice has always been yours. You just didn't know you had a choice, but now you do. James takes out his phone one last time, opens his notes, starts typing. Chapter 1, The Morning Everything Changed. He's writing his second book. Not about his own journey this time, but about the practical tools, the specific techniques, the step-by-step process anyone can use to identify their mental habits and change them. Because his story is just one story, but the principles are universal. The 7 mental habits that destroyed his potential are the same 7 habits destroying millions of other people's potential right now, and they can all be changed. As James walks home through London's January night, he thinks about you. Yes, you, the person experiencing this story right now. And he wants you to know something. Whatever mental habits are limiting you right now, whatever voice in your head is telling you that you're not good enough, that it's too late to change, that you're just not the kind of person who achieves their potential, that voice is lying. It's just a habit, a learned pattern, something your brain does automatically because it's done it so many times before. But it's not truth. It's not who you are. It's not your ceiling. You can change. At any age. In any circumstances. The brain you have right now, regardless of how old you are, is capable of forming new neural pathways, learning new patterns, creating new habits that serve you instead of limiting you. It won't be easy. It will require consistent effort, probably professional help, definitely uncomfortable moments of recognizing how you've been sabotaging yourself. But it's possible. James is proof. Sophie is proof. The hundreds of readers who've reached out to share their own transformations are proof. And you could be proof too. The question is, are you ready to start noticing? Ready to see the mental habits that have been running your life on autopilot? Ready to recognize that the voice in your head is optional, that comparison is poison, that perfectionism is procrastination in disguise, that your potential isn't fixed but expandable? Are you ready to do the work? Because your life is waiting. The version of you that isn't limited by old mental habits, that isn't trapped by inherited thought patterns, that isn't comparing yourself to others, or listening to the critical voice, or afraid to fail. That version of you is possible, is waiting, is ready to emerge if you're willing to let go of the habits that have kept it hidden. James reaches his flat, unlocks the door, steps inside, and starts writing. Your turn starts now.